Everyone. This is the I Care About You podcast, and today we're talking about problems we have creating deep relationships, long-lasting relationships, deep friendships, and staying connected with folks. We often refer to this problem as relationship avoidance. It is not that we aren't friendly or nice, but rather that we struggle to develop deep relationships, to build long-lasting friendships, and to make long-lasting connections with people. Why do we have this difficulty with others on a deep level? Why do we have trouble forging friendships, relationships, meaningful engagements? And how can we move beyond our limitations that we've created? Is it possible to move beyond what keeps us from building and maintaining these relationships? Yes, it is. You can make friends and find long-lasting relationships with partners by making a few shifts in your life. Now, before we dive in, I want to remind you to please like and subscribe and leave a comment if you feel so inclined. It would really help me out. It helps me develop content for you and realize what you want to learn about and struggles that you're having yourselves. Also, please pre-order my book, Reasons to Live. It's out September 10th. But you can pre-order now. That really helps me out, and I'll put a link in the description. So let's get into it. It is also important to be aware of relationships that you don't want to maintain, and that's okay too. But if you can't develop deeper relationships, it can sometimes be hard to tell which relationship or connection you want to keep and which you want to let go of. So bear that in mind. You don't have to forge deep relationships with everyone that you come across. Why do we have these challenges in relationships? There are many reasons, but I offer just a few here. First, perhaps you have had a caregiver who wasn't always there or didn't always model behavior that was encouraging to relationships. Perhaps they more modeled behavior analogous to relationship avoidance. Or maybe you had a caregiver who plunged too deep into relationships only to have things backfire. And that creates this element of fear. You become afraid of repeating those mistakes you saw your caregiver do or someone close to you do. Perhaps we ourselves have had relationships in the past that have made us feel insecure or lesser than. We may have experienced abuse in the past, abusive relationships, or grown up with a family belief that being tough, stoic is what's most important, and that vulnerability is showing a weakness and is unacceptable. Perhaps we were bullied for something about ourselves that we now feel is inappropriate. We've internalized a lot of that bullying as one, that's how people are, and two, maybe we do have these major flaws within ourselves that make us unworthy of friendship. Long story short, our past may have shaped our beliefs to a great extent. The good news is that you can change your beliefs. You can realize that beliefs and patterns that you have from childhood are actually someone else's patterns that you were taught. You can decide the patterns modeled to you were not the ones you want to keep. This isn't a bad judgment on the person who modeled these behaviors, but rather a choice that you are making to find your own fulfilling patterns for overall happiness. It may have worked for that person and how they made it through life, but it isn't working for you. That's all. It's not a judgment on those folks. Everyone has their own shadows to work with, and we appreciate that. It's just realizing that how one person led their life isn't necessarily how you want to lead yours. How can you tell if you're avoiding relationships or if the person isn't right for you? How can you tell the difference here? How do you know you're avoiding relationships? Here are just a few of the things you might be doing to keep yourself at distance with others. One, focusing on flaws and differences. Suppose you use flaws and differences to excuse why you can't get too close to someone. If you sabotage growing connections by concentrating on differences, it's easy to feel like that person isn't someone worth pursuing a relationship with. If you overemphasize differences and do not give the same attention and appreciation to commonalities and the positive aspects the person brings, you often find yourself feeling that you don't have connections with the person. These are all signs of overemphasizing and focusing on flaws and differences to sabotage the relationship. Where it was once not even an issue, that you had a different political stance, you might feel that you can't be friends with someone who thinks differently simply because of that one fact alone. Sometimes it's simple as saying they are too old, they're too young, They're not in my same economic bracket. I don't like the same things they like. Usually, all of these things are really focusing on what is different about you and that person rather than focusing on what is the same. Usually, those are pretty minor details that we've blown out of proportion. Another one is worrying that other people will judge you. This is a biggie for societies like ours where judgment is extreme and society has been stratified to some degree. You worry about what your parents and other friends will think of you if you don't have friends that check certain boxes for the folks you're trying to impress. This can lead to having friends you might not relate to, yet missing out on people you want to be friends with. It can look like settling for a partner to impress your parents or surrounding yourself with friends you can only get so close to. This can also look like if you're missing out on a BFF experience, perhaps you just really aren't tapping into what you really want for that best friend experience and not what you think others want or what would be impressive to certain people. Another thing you can see yourself doing if you have relationship avoidance is suppressing needs. This can look like not sharing what you need in a relationship, often because you might feel weak for doing so. Perhaps you don't want to rely on anyone. You might feel you can't trust people or to care or support you. You may have created a very rigid boundaries or criteria for relationships that prevent you from being flexible. This is all about worrying about not having control in the relationship. Another thing you might find yourself doing is fostering disconnect. Fostering disconnect in relationships, not getting in too deep, not relying on someone, often makes you feel like you have more control. You feel like you're the boss in the relationship because you could take it or leave it. If the relationship fails, you won't be upset. This can also mean not taking the emotions of your friend or partner seriously and thinking they are weak because they are emotionally invested and you are not. It's all about a power dynamic. Another thing you might do is finding excuses to leave when a relationship progresses to a certain point. This has to do with a vulnerability. Once you progress to a certain point in a relationship, you start to become vulnerable. You have to in order to disclose certain things about yourself. Deeper conversations occur, the more profound feelings and beliefs are shared, deeper conversations begin to happen. All of this is a space of vulnerability because we are being asked to reveal parts of our intimate self. These are things that you don't share with everyone. It might arise if your partner or friend asks you for advice. It might reveal a secret belief you have, or they begin to start deeper conversations or to ask you questions that will force you to say something about yourself that you don't share with everyone. Conversely, you might judge the other person as being too clingy or too needy or even too high maintenance or not normal, in quotes, as if that thing even exists. But what you're really doing is finding excuses to leave the relationship once you've entered into that space of deeper connection. Another thing you might find yourself doing is only discussing superficial topics. You stick to the basics like weather, pop culture, popular music, a new restaurant in the neighborhood, things like that. You avoid conversations about opening up to someone, showing emotions, being vulnerable yet again, your dreams, your goals, your plans, and so on. You don't share those with other people. If you are asked about these things, you might make a joke to deflect the question, leave the conversation, or use anger to deflect people. Anger is a powerful tool to deflect because often people will immediately change the topic or leave because they feel scared or threatened or unsettled by sudden anger. People who fly off the handle, quote unquote, frequently use this tactic. The dogs are right next to me, and that dog always does that coughing thing that you're hearing, but that's what that noise is. Finding soulmates means letting them into the sacred space of your soul. It means being vulnerable, and you can't go there. You can't find a soulmate unless you're willing to be vulnerable. Those things go hand in hand. Another thing you might do is using unrealistic relationship ideals and standards for relationships. And if your relationship doesn't measure up to those unrealistic standards, then you deem it as not worth your time. Using this can look like comparing your relationship to the ideals that are in media or in stories that you've read. It can look like having a romanticized idea of what a relationship is and being overly disappointed when the person doesn't live up to those standards 100% of the time. When someone messes up just slightly, you immediately think the relationship is not long-term, or the person hates you, or you hate them. Once this happens, you may even fantasize about someone else who is ideal ideal. And over time, your ideal version of a lover, partner, friend becomes your standard. No one can live up to that standard. So you have problems cultivating long-term relationships. What steps can you take to move beyond old patterns and find long-term relationships? For these techniques, you might use breath work, meditation, journaling, support to help you along the way. Simply breathing slowly and deeply as you encounter an uncomfortable moment can help you move beyond old patterns. So there's more to it than just saying, yes, that's my pattern. Oh, yes, I do this. Oh, yes, I do that. That's extremely important. But you also then want to put action behind that realization. And putting action behind the realization can also be stressful. You can employ other things to help you along the way, like breathing deeply and slowly, like meditation, like writing about it in a journal, like talking about it with a friend, like going to a therapist or another healthcare professional, like using a coach or a meditation teacher, or anything else that helps you process things as you're shifting. So here are some ways you can kind of move beyond those old patterns. One, be honest with yourself about your fears that you have about relationships, what makes you feel insecure about relationships, what problems do you have around intimacy and letting people into your inner self. Realize what those are. You might make a list. You might journal about it. You might just start writing it on Post-it notes or whatever mechanism that you use. You want to make sure that you document those things to yourself so that you're aware. Just thinking in the moment, I don't know if you're anything like me, I can think of something totally profound in the moment and then can't recall it later on in the day. So a list can be useful if that is something that you also feel you do. 2, begin to build a tolerance window. It is often helpful to work with a wellness professional, such as a coach or a therapist or meditation teacher, on this. Start to notice your triggers. What sets you off down that road of withdrawing? Notice what thoughts, images, ideas, memories come up when you feel triggered. Work on these images and thoughts. Change your internal dialogue to one of inquiry and change. Instead of just letting the internal dialogue go as it usually does with the same old stories, say to yourself, why do I believe this? Is this valid, or is this a childhood mechanism that I used? Is this my belief, or is it someone else's? I don't believe that anymore. Or is that someone else's belief and not even mine? That was a thing that happened, but it isn't happening now. This is very useful if you've come out of relationships that have been really hurtful, to realize that a new relationship is not that old relationship. This may have happened to me once, this thing happened, but it isn't happening now. I can trust myself to know the way. Very, very important. Many of us, especially coming from abuse, feel like we can't trust ourselves to know the way because we messed up that one time and didn't know the way. This person is not the one that comes to mind when I am triggered. They are a different person altogether. I can trust this person. I can trust my beliefs about this person. Very, very important if you've had challenging or abusive relationships in the past to realize that you can trust yourself. If you reflect on relationships that weren't positive for you, you will realize that you were telling yourself that this was an issue. You did have instinctual beliefs about the situation, but you just didn't listen to them at the time. So learn how to listen to yourself a little bit more and to believe in yourself a little bit more and to know that you have the answers to what relationships work for you, and you're smart enough and capable enough to know when a relationship is good for you and not good for you. Practice mindful tolerance. Notice what comes up when you're triggered. Be aware of your thoughts, images, bodily feelings, emotions, and beliefs that trigger when triggers come up. Take a moment to observe rather than react and start regulating your responses. I am feeling afraid here, but why? I am safe in this space. I can feel safe. I am safe. I am misjudging the situation based on an experience. How can I feel more neutral about this? Again, be inquisitive about why you have the beliefs and triggers that you have. Find ways to let the other person know when you have a moment that triggers you. I feel triggered by this conversation because I'm working through something. I need you to understand, and I need time to process what this is. Or you could say something like, I need you to support the work I'm doing to overcome past trauma and experiences with whatever it is. I need you to do this for me. I need you to be more understanding. I need you to let this topic go. I need you to be here for me. Believe me, everyone has their own stuff to deal with. And most of us are pretty understanding. You might just inspire someone else to advocate for themselves in some way. You may be offering them a safe space to work on their issues too. A lot of positive things you don't realize will come out of doing this work, and some of it is to help other folks feel confident enough to do the same. Another thing you could do is simply stay there. Easier said than done, right? If the relationship is not presenting a threat, then try to stay with it. Commit to the relationship, but offer up your needs. I sometimes need space. I'm worried about my freedom. I need to feel secure and accepted. Be truthful about your needs and insecurities. This helps create a truthful, heart-centered relationship right off the bat. Practice vulnerability in small ways and work up to bigger things. Can you be vulnerable saying things like, when I look at the sky, I see all my possibilities, or I like this band a lot, or I really like this book, although it didn't get great reviews, or this movie, or whatever it is. Have you heard of it? What do you think? Offer up a like of yours that you think the other person might not know. I like soy lattes, even though they aren't as popular anymore. I am afraid of roller coasters, and then gradually move to more profound or deeper vulnerabilities. But start with things that are pretty easy to say. And I know I'm saying these like, I'm afraid of roller coasters. That's a big one for me. 100% true, but I do have a hard time telling people that I'm afraid of roller coasters, which is really silly when I think about it deeply. But in the moment, I'm worried that people will judge me as being a baby. So that's a vulnerability that you can work with, and it becomes easier once you use these smaller vulnerabilities in order to work up to saying things that might be deeper or more important to you. Practice in safe space and test the waters. It's important to practice all of these techniques in a relatively safe or brave spaces. This will help you find positive reinforcement. Surround yourself with support. I can't say this enough about everything you ever work on. Therapists, coaches, meditation teachers, wellness professionals, and alike really help. Find one that is helpful and works with you rather than judges you or dictates to you. Find family and friends, support groups, etc. to help you out. Support groups are online, are a good start if you feel that a face-to-face interaction is too much and you need to build up a support system. In my groups, a lot of people don't even turn on their cameras, but everyone's present and talking in the conversation. If you need quiet time and solitude, build it up for yourself. Make sure you have it. Be honest about needing it. Be honest with yourself about when it's rejuvenation and when it's avoidance of the relationship. If you live with a partner, you might develop a routine of alone time, such as, I do not like to talk before I have coffee. That's a big one for me. I meditate by myself from 6 to 7 every night, or I go for walks by myself every afternoon. You can even opt for vacation time alone. Whatever it is, build this alone time for rejuvenation into the relationship from the start if it's something that you really, really need. Another thing you can do is build on your emotional intelligence. Practice ways to express yourself emotionally. Learn to recognize emotions when they come up and to be able to sit with uncomfortable emotions. Journaling, meditation, breathwork, mindfulness can help you sit with difficult emotions. Name an emotion to yourself when it comes up. Oh, this is happiness, sadness, anger. I did a podcast on naming your emotions that you might want to review if this is something you feel you need to work on. Practice self-care and understanding and give yourself grace. A lot of these patterns you've had your entire life, or at least that you can remember, and they take a while to shift. And working with them can be hard. You'll be on a good trajectory, and then you might take a step backwards, and then you might go forwards again, or up and down, what have you. And it's really important to have grace with yourself and to know that you're working on it, and working on it is enough. As always, change takes time, change is possible, and change can be amazing. But it does take time and perseverance. You can change all the things that aren't serving you. You are a powerful being, capable of all things. And know that you can have deep, loving, kind, exciting, and long-lasting relationships. That is possible for you. And as always, my friend, know that I love you and I support you, and you can be your change. Take care.